50 years ago this summer, each of them lost a brother to the struggle for civil rights. They are Julia Cheney Moss, the sister of James Cheney, Stephen Swerner, the brother of Michael Swerner, and David Goodman, whose brother Andrew we just saw in that opening video. By coincidence, CBS News cameras captured him during that briefing about the risks of volunteering in Mississippi. Please join me now in welcoming them to this stage. So let's set the stage here. 50 years ago tonight, the manhunt was in day 34. Your brothers had gone to investigate the bombing of a black church in Neshoba County, one of the most high-risk areas for civil rights workers. The sheriff and his deputy were members of the Ku Klux Klan. After the murders, having no faith in Mississippi's commitment to civil rights, the Johnson administration went after 18 members of the Ku Klux Klan, including the local sheriff and his deputy, charging them with conspiracy to violate your brother's civil rights. Only 7 were convicted, including the deputy. Finally, 9 years ago, Mississippi finally brought state charges against the Klan member behind the plot. He was Edgar Ray Killen. He is now 89 years old. He was convicted of manslaughter and is serving a 60-year sentence. The verdict came June 21st, 2005, exactly 40 years after your brothers disappeared. Julia, you were what, 17?
17 at the time.
At the time. Give us a picture of what it was like to be a black kid, 17 years old, living in Mississippi in those days.
Well, as I recall, growing up in Mississippi, we grew up in a safe community. As long as we were within our community, our parents did not think it was necessary to kind of feed us information about the realities outside of our community. So there were lots of things that we simply weren't aware of, and every child in the community belonged to every adult in the community. So there was always caring adults around us. It is only after we grew beyond going to school in the community and had to move outside of the community that we began to get a sense of the realities outside of our community. And even though our parents had raised us in a way that, without even giving us information about the dangers of the world in which we live, they had raised us in a way that allowed us to be respectful to all adults. It didn't matter the race. And we were able to move throughout the communities without injury or hindrance at that time.
When did you realize that something was wrong here, that your brother was missing? He wasn't just out on this mission.
It was actually, we got an inkling of what was going on when my brother James decided that he was going to, his question was, why do we have to live this way? And he decided to figure out what some of the rationale was and then what some of the remedies could be. So then it was a kind of an aha, but it wasn't until he was missing that the real concern occurred for me, myself in particular, and I'm sure for my siblings as well.
What drew your brothers to go down there? Was there a lot of talk about this in New York?
There was a lot of activity in the civil rights movement in New York, and that Mickey had been involved in a variety of demonstrations. Most of the people in our family worked for CORE and were involved in various activities. It was after the bombing in Birmingham that Mickey and his wife Rita decided they really wanted to go south. And so they went to Mississippi, and I guess they got there in the middle of January. And James became immediately part of the group that they worked with in the state.
And David, your brother, he was just a volunteer, right? He just decided. And Why did he decide to go?
Well, you know, my impression and my belief, based on the few conversations I had about his going, was that he was a kind of person who just felt, he wasn't very political, but he viewed things in terms of fair and unfair. And he heard that if you were African American in Mississippi, you couldn't vote. And he just said, that's unfair, and I want to do something about it. It wasn't complicated. And he was a curious person. He did things like this before. When he was 15, he got in a bus and went to West Virginia. I'm a fourth generation civil engineer, mining engineer, and he knew mining was dangerous, and they were in West Virginia poor miners, and he didn't understand why they were poor because it's pretty well paying in New York where you mine tunnels. And he said that's unfair, so he went. So he had done this kind of thing before.
And how old was he?
He was 3 years older than me. I was 17 and he was 20. He had to get my mother's permission to go. She needed to sign a waiver, which she did.
Julia, what happened to your family after it was confirmed that your brother was actually missing?
Well, prior to it being confirmed that he was actually missing, when it began to become a knowledge that my mother was his mother, she lost her job. She lost her ability to work and provide for her family.
I mean, how did that happen? What?
Well, she worked in a bakery, and she got to work one morning, and she was told that you're that Cheney boy's mama. You no longer work here. And she turned around and came home. For my brother Ben, he could not go to school unless he was escorted to and from. So it really became very difficult in terms of just livelihood and our well-being.
And eventually your family had to move.
Yes,
Now you stayed.
I did.
How were you able to do that?
Well, I was married at the time.
And so they didn't know that was your name. You didn't know you were a Cheney.
Thank you.
Tell me about your brothers and what happened with your families when you got there.
I think what our family did was it started. My father and my mother and I did work fundraising for CORE and SNCC, feeling that that was the way we could make a contribution. But the important thing is we knew right away that they were dead. The fact that they were missing, Mickey and Jim were so organized. Mickey was going to call up at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and by the next morning, if there was no phone call, then they were gone. And that the clan was such that we were pretty sure of that. But the important thing, I think, of the whole event, and it was, as somebody said, it was the America's interracial lynching. If two of the three weren't white, then it probably would have not made the news. That if it was only Jim, or if it was three African Americans from Meridian, Mississippi, I mean, people in Mississippi, black people in Mississippi, have been killed for years, and with the exception of Edgar Evers, it had never made the paper. It had never made network news. People working for civil rights was something that the federal government didn't seem to care about. And the news media, by and large, didn't care that much about. So that's the important fact of the event, is that Andy and Mickey were white, and that but that's what gave publicity and started bringing the pressure. And it's sad to say that was what was necessary to bring that kind of pressure to the state and to the federal government.
David and your brother, what was the impact on your family? I mean, I suppose one never gets over something like this. You learn to cope with it. But
It's so complicated. I mean, there's so many different levels. Steve touched on one. I mean, I was 17. I just graduated from high school. And, you know, my grandfather used to say, if you have a question, ask a 17-year-old. They know everything. So I thought I knew everything, but it turned out I didn't know anything. I mean, I didn't realize that there were people. I actually did not realize there were people in this country who would murder you or be willing to murder you because you had a different opinion. And that was naive, or ignorant, I should say. And in my heart, I don't think or believe that my mother knew that either. Now, there were people who did. I think the Schwerners understood that a lot better than we did. That there are people so mean that they would murder you for your opinion, and we viewed it as assassinating the Constitution. In addition, it was very complicated for me to figure out. It was quite a experience.
Was it your son, or I mean, was it your brother or your brother? I'm sorry, I just don't recall, that actually wanted to be buried there.
Well, we wanted, my family wanted Mickey to be buried with Jim, and that aside from the fact that it was against the law to do that in the state of Mississippi, you might remember this. The funeral director said you can't do it because as soon as you do it,
because blacks and whites couldn't be married in the same cemetery.
And if you tried to do it, it'd be desecrated over and over and over again, as has already happened to James's grave any number of times. So we wanted that, but it couldn't happen. So Mickey came back to New York, and there was.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for coming and being with us tonight.
Well,
I know this is not
us.
an easy thing, even after all these years, but what a story. Thank you. Thank you so much.